Demons. Horned evil creatures, the smell of sulfur, red skin associated with hellfire, 666. These are all the things that would normally come to our head if we were asked to imagine a demon. Whether you be an atheist or a theist, you associate all of these things with the mental representation and processing of the word. But where do these characteristics come from? And are there any references in the Hebrew biblical script to justify them? Hello, noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and this is another episode of my series about the literal translation and interpretation of the Bible. This series will help you distinguish which information derives directly from a literal translation of the biblical text, conveyed by its grammatical construction and historical context, and which ones are instead allegorical interpretations, medieval theology, within Western thought. In other words, the Truth Series Explained is a linguistic discussion trying to give you a translator's perspective onto the information contained in period sources, through textual analysis, grounding our observation on social, cultural, and artistic devices used by the original authors, without the theological and cultural layers that, as we can see, have clearly become entrenched in our minds. If you wish to believe the theology and add it yourself to my work, be my guest. On the same note, theists, atheists, or agnostics, you're all welcome here. Moreover, our discussion today is not ontological. We are not talking about whether these things exist, but how they were believed or perceived by both the ancient Israelites and subsequently by medieval Europeans. In period. Whenever we read a passage from an ancient text, we also need to consider the reasons behind a specific word choice. What was the target audience? How is such word used within a poetic frame? And we also need to be aware of our own cultural and linguistic preconception, namely the expectations and the semantic baggage that comes with a translated word whenever we select a viable candidate in translation. In other words, translation is a cognitive theory, and any translated work is but one within many possible end results. And the words in the receiving languages we choose are of an associative nature within our processes in memory. We do it without even realizing it, which is why it is my opinion that literal interpretation requires a metacognitive process. Differently from the angels, which are constantly spoken about, the Old Testament doesn't give a lot of space to demonic entities, as these presents are most often mentioned rather than explained. This, of course, presents a challenge, and empirically, it becomes even more problematic when we try to attribute the modern Western definition of the word demon onto the ancient text. Still, some specific names are mentioned, and various types seem to be indicated. And there are even some apparently innocent words that may retain a hidden, or should I say veiled, meaning when looking at them in the original language, such as the word goat, particularly through the lenses of textual parallelism. The Old Testament doesn't tell us much about what the ancient Israelites believed when it comes to evil spirits, or how they interface with the human realm, so we might need to look at a few surrounding cultures and beliefs as well to paint a more complete picture. We know that some Israelites sacrificed such beings, and perhaps some images, actual physical images, were involved. But a slightly more precise idea of what such beings may look like can be found in ancient Sumerian belief systems. For instance, late Babylonian imagery connects the idea of humans with goat faces. Egyptians also represent some malevolent spirits in half-human, half-animal form. Mesopotamians associated evil spirits with very specific illnesses and personal misfortune. Now, the New Testament, which was written in Greek, we'll get back to that in a second, does report that Jesus himself performed several exorcisms to expel demons. Consequently, our question here today is the following. Can the English idea of the word demon, the way we understand it today, carry over into the Old Testament ideas of Bronze Age Israel? What is the linguistic connection of the modern English word demon with whatever word was used in the original text? Keep in mind, there isn't one single word in biblical Hebrew that would translate perfectly the Christian concept attached to the modern English word demon. So when in English you find words like demon, evil spirit, or devils, the counterpart in Hebrew has an array of different words, which are not synonymous with each other and present some significant differences. We therefore will see how concepts are combined to generate novelty, aka conceptual combination. However, if we dig deeper, there is some common ground with both Western thought and Western languages at an etymological level. Let's have a look at ancient Greek. The English word demon in origin is Greek, daimon, from the root da, to divide, So let's see how the Greeks understood it in its original meaning, since this word went through its own semantic evolution through time. Even though it is attested mainly as a philosophical divine or spiritual entity, often but not always with a negative sense, its earlier meaning should be semantically related to its root, giving us ruler who divides. The original Greek word just means a spirit in ancient Greek. It doesn't have to be negative, but it can be. Here is an example of a positive meaning. For example, a person in high spirit, or living in a euthymic state, if you will. But there are other possible translations of the word, which can be connected with a biblical text. Deity, divine power, lesser god, guiding spirit, tutelary deity, sometimes including souls of the dead. Now here comes the linguistic dilemma. Is it possible to reconcile this original meaning in the ancient Greek etymology to the words used in the biblical text in biblical Hebrew, both with the idea of neutrality, sometimes evil, and even deity? Let's jump into the text and let's see if we can find a tether. Biblically speaking, several of the entities which we find translated just as demons in English are in fact originally those deities that were worshipped by the enemy of Israel. It's a relative perspective, woven within the threads of ancient tribalistic defense mentality. Us versus them, inward versus outward. We can thus demonstrate that both the Greek word and the ancient Hebrew word are both interleaved at a semantic level. Belzebub, the Lord of Flies, a name of a high-ranking demon. The name of this demon derives from the biblical name Baal-Zebub, in his capacity as the god of the hated Philistines, specifically the god of the city of Ekron. So in the Bible, Belzebub, or Baal-Zebub, isn't a demon per se. He is the deity worshipped by the enemy. In time, he became the representative of the heathen power, and consequently the arch-enemy. So it becomes the name of a demon in the modern understanding. But to the ancients, he would have been an enemy deity, or a false idol, or incorrect worship, however you want to put it. You see, in ancient religions, Baal-Zebub was associated with several sacrifices in connection with his ability to cast away flies, hence the name. Plagues often being associated with the presence of flies. So sacrifices were made, blood was shed, so that he would use his power to cast away the flies, removing diseases. What makes this name relevant is because it's mentioned by Jesus himself in Matthew. Let's have a look. But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, "It is only by Belzebub, the prince of demons, that this fellow drives out demons." Whereupon Jesus answered, "If Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then shall his kingdom stand? And if I by Belzebub cast out demons, by whom do your sons cast them out? But if I cast out demons by the Spirit of God, then the kingdom of God is come unto you." Please keep in mind that the word demon in this case, the one used by Yeshua, Jesus, should be understood as the word shedim. We'll talk about what this means and how this connects with the idea of worship of other deities later on in the video.